A black CEO was removed from first class so a celebrity could take the seat. But months later, the same celebrity was still apologizing in court. He was removed from his first-class seat so a celebrity could sit, thinking no one would notice. He didn't realize the CEO never forgets, and justice has a long memory. Subscribe if you believe disrespect always pays a price. The cabin air was unusually still, thick with the kind of tension that didn't need words to be felt. Dr. Laren Voss, dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit with subtle lapel detailing, sat upright in seat 1A of Skylux Flight 742. He had already powered on his wrist interface, a sleek silver band that projected a soft blue holographic screen across his palm, glowing faintly in the dimmed first-class cabin light. He scrolled through encrypted files with smooth flicks of his fingers, tuning out the low murmurs around him. The seat's memory foam adjusted precisely to his posture, but comfort wasn't what he sought. It was anonymity, silence, peace. Then movement, just off his peripheral vision. A tall, pale flight attendant with a clipped walk and overly rehearsed smile moved down the aisle like he was on stage rather than a job. Corvin Hale. Lauren had noticed him before, his eyes too alert, his attention overly focused. Not on the cabin, not on procedures, on him. Every few minutes, Corvin's gaze returned, like a shadow that didn't know when to fade. At first, Lauren thought it coincidence, but this glance, longer than the others, held intent behind it. "Excuse me, sir," Corvin said, tone syrupy, his ID badge bouncing slightly on his chest as the aircraft rocked lightly in turbulence. "There's been a slight adjustment to the seating plan." Lauren didn't look up at first. He finished reading a line of encrypted data, locked the display with a single tap, and then calmly raised his eyes. "Adjustment?" Corvin's smile tightened. "Yes, due to a VIP accommodation request. We'll need you to, temporarily, relocate to another seat." Lauren blinked once, the silence between them stretching. "I booked this seat weeks ago. It's non-transferable, and I have the confirmation," he said, lifting the device slightly to emphasize the point. Corvin's eyes darted to the wrist display but quickly looked away, hands folding tightly in front of him like a student awaiting a scolding. "Yes, I understand, sir. I do. But the decision came from above. I don't have discretion in the matter." "From above?" Lauren repeated, voice calm but his gaze sharpened. "Above your rank or above your ethics?" That stopped Corvin momentarily. He forced a light chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just following instructions." Lauren's fingers curled lightly around the armrest. Around them, other passengers began whispering, the kind of low, drawn-out murmurs that filled awkward silences with speculation. Someone a few rows back muttered, "Is that who I think it is?" Another leaned slightly into the aisle, phone tilted at a discreet angle, already recording. And then the reason made himself known. Jackson Vale strolled aboard like a scene had just started rolling. A young man in his mid-20s, styled for attention, not travel. Designer coat slung over one shoulder, camera-ready smirk already affixed to his face. No entourage, but his presence was heavy with self-importance, as if invisible cameras followed him everywhere. Lauren recognized him immediately, not because he followed celebrity culture, but because Jackson's face had recently dominated social media ads for his streaming platform and self-launched clothing line. Corvin's expression brightened unnaturally. "Right on time," he whispered, possibly to himself, as he stepped forward to greet Jackson with the kind of cheer that felt more like fanboy energy than professionalism. Lauren stayed seated. Jackson looked around, blinking as if puzzled by the layout, then tilted his chin at Corvin. "Where am I sitting?" Corvin turned toward Laren, gesturing too casually at seat 1A. "Right here, Mr. Vale." A beat of silence. Lauren didn't move. Corvin's voice lowered, tight with tension. "Sir, if you could please, just for a moment, step aside while we sort this out?" Lauren didn't flinch. "There's nothing to sort out. I have the seat. And the contract that says so. Yes, but Corvin leaned in, lowering his voice into a near whisper. It would really help if you just cooperated. This comes from corporate, not me. And does corporate know it's illegal to displace a paying passenger without cause? Lauren asked, still without raising his voice, still without blinking. Especially when safety documentation, boarding logs, and reassignment protocols must be updated in real time? The tension around them was a vice slowly tightening. Jackson was already setting his carry-on beside the seat, clearly assuming the situation would resolve in his favor. Corvin, caught between feigned authority and the image of control, now looked pale. "Please, sir," he said again, voice a touch more desperate now. "It's just better this way." Lauren stood, not aggressively, not hurriedly, but with a deliberate, commanding precision that turned every whisper around them to stillness. He stepped into the aisle, facing Corvin directly. He looked once at Jackson, who didn't meet his eyes, then back to Corvin, who tried and failed to hold the stare. Then Lauren said just one thing, a sentence that didn't need to be shouted. It didn't need dramatics. It needed only truth. "You'll regret the choice you just made." The seatbelt snapped. Lauren Voss clenched both armrests as the plane shuddered mid-climb, a sudden jolt rattling the cabin and sending murmurs down the aisle. The faulty latch had given way the moment turbulence hit, flinging the thin metal tongue against the wall with a metallic clink. He didn't cry out or raise alarm. He simply braced himself, knees pressed against the seat in front, broad shoulders hunched in the cramped space, breath steady despite the sudden drop in altitude. The back row of the aircraft, wedged near the humming restroom doors, smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. It was a place of low expectations, exactly where they thought he belonged. From the front, laughter echoed. "Another shot, Jackson?" Corvin Hale's voice floated through the cabin, too cheerful for the tension in the air. "Let me get the lighting just right." Lauren didn't need to look to know what was happening. He had seen the flashes already, snapped photos, hastily posed moments with starry-eyed passengers leaning across the aisle to capture themselves with Jackson Vale, the golden-haired celebrity who now occupied Lauren's rightful seat in first class. Lauren leaned slightly to one side, adjusting the wrist device beneath his sleeve. The display activated silently with a brush of his finger against the sensor embedded in the underside. A soft, blue glow pulsed once, indicating the recording had resumed. Not just video, he was logging everything. Timestamps, ambient noise, cabin communications, and security protocol failures. This was no longer about comfort. It hadn't been since the moment he was told to move. Moments earlier, Corvin had strutted by his row without even a glance. He hadn't noticed the snapped belt or the strain Lauren endured just to stay upright during the turbulence. The flight attendant barely slowed his stride as he muttered, "First class gets priority checks," and disappeared down the aisle again. Lauren's jaw tightened. Not in anger would cloud his thinking, but in restraint. He turned his head slightly, watching Corvin now hovering beside Jackson again, this time adjusting the cabin lights above him, clearly preparing for another round of photos. "What if I say something dumb?" Jackson chuckled, shifting in the wide leather seat. "I don't want to look like I'm just some spoiled guy flying fancy for the camera." "You let me worry about that," Corvin replied smoothly, crouching next to him. "Just be natural. Laugh a bit. Mention how Skylux takes care of VIPs. You know, best in the skies kind of vibe." Lauren's hand hovered over the screen, zooming in slightly as Corvin leaned closer. The screen captured the image clearly, Corvin's own tablet visible in reflection. One document open among others. Passenger Reassignment Protocol. Tier C. His eyes narrowed. Tier C? There was no such classification in official seating guidelines, at least not in any regulated manifest he had seen. And Lauren had seen more than most. Not just as CEO of Velian Systems, but as a senior consultant for the Orbital Ethics Division, an entity tasked with reviewing and advising on the aerospace industry's deepest violations. But that identity was a sealed one. hidden for strategic reason. If the airline had unknowingly pushed out the wrong passenger, it would be a mistake they'd soon regret. Dramatic irony swelled within the dim-lit cabin. No one knew who Loren Voss truly was. To them, he was just a well-dressed man with quiet eyes and a trimmed beard, exiled to economy by the whim of a grinning attendant and a fame-hungry airline. But underneath that calm, his mind was drawing maps, legal routes, ethical breaches, safety violations. Every second was a part of the archive now, stored securely and ready to be unpacked. Then came the words that shifted everything. From the front of the cabin, Corvin leaned over to Jackson, whispering, but not softly enough. "Don't worry, we got rid of the guy." Laughter followed. Loren didn't react, didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. He simply sat back against the seat, the broken belt still loose at his side, and looked straight ahead, past the flickering seatbelt sign, past the snack cart now stuck behind a half-closed curtain, past the manufactured image of perfection being sculpted up front. He closed his eyes, as if resting, but his lips moved just enough for the wrist device to catch the whisper. "This flight will define your future, not mine." The oxygen mask compartment dropped with a sudden metallic snap, its edge slicing the air inches from Loren Voss's forehead. Reflexively, he tilted his head back just in time to avoid injury. The mask swung from its tether like a pendulum, a soft hiss escaping as if the plane itself had exhaled. Around him, passengers glanced upward in alarm, murmurs rippling across the cabin like a wave brushing the sand. Loren didn't move. His eyes narrowed as he reached up slowly and inspected the unit's exposed interior. This wasn't turbulence. It was a maintenance failure. Small, but telling. In a premium-class aircraft, something like this should be impossible. He gently pushed the compartment closed, though it clicked back with a hesitant rattle, no longer secure. His mind shifted gears. This was no longer about dignity. It was about something deeper, something that felt wrong in the very structure of this flight. He sat back, fingers clasped loosely in his lap, the wrist device on his arm blinking softly as it began recording again. The cabin lights dimmed for a moment as if the plane shuddered in guilt. Then, overhead, speakers crackled and the voice of the captain echoed with irritating cheerfulness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank Mr. Jackson Vale for choosing Skylux for this journey. We're honored to welcome such a high-profile guest aboard. Please enjoy your flight." A pause. Then applause, scattered, half-hearted, confused. Some clapped instinctively. Others looked around, unsure if this was normal. Loren didn't clap. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, the slow simmer of dramatic irony boiling beneath his calm expression. Now it was confirmed. This wasn't just Corvin's decision. This entire stunt had corporate fingerprints. Jackson Vale, draped across the seat that had been Loren's, grinned like a king among commoners. The celebrity raised his phone high and recorded himself with a wide grin, turning the camera toward the flight attendants and first-class surroundings. "Another day, another upgrade," he said into the mic, laughing. "Too important to sit in economy, you know how it is." Loren looked away, steadying his breathing. The words weren't just arrogant, they were proof, and, more importantly, they were being broadcast in real time. Every passenger with eyes and ears could see the truth forming in plain sight. But still, no one understood just how deep this injustice ran. As the plane stabilized momentarily, Loren leaned sideways, glancing subtly toward the galley. Corvin Hale stood there, typing rapidly on a small, unauthorized tablet tucked behind the safety manual clipboard. Loren squinted. The screen was angled away, but for 1 second, a fraction, he caught the heading of a file. Passenger Reassignment Protocol, Tier C. Loren's pulse slowed. He had read every federal aviation document in his career as both aerospace executive and ethics consultant. There was no such protocol in any legitimate record. The phrasing itself, Tier C, implied hierarchy. It meant someone, somewhere, had created a system where some passengers could be silently shifted, replaced, downgraded, and humiliated. All while following a script. His fingers tapped his wrist device 3 times, saving a timestamp, locking this moment. Suddenly, the cabin jolted hard to the right. Trays clattered. A child yelped. A man shouted something in a foreign language. Lauren threw his hand across the seat next to him, steadying an elderly man who was tipping dangerously toward the aisle. On his other side, another passenger had already fallen sideways, his glasses knocked off by the sudden tilt. Lauren moved quickly, catching the falling man by his shoulder and guiding him upright. "Deep breaths," he said calmly, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Keep your feet under the seat rail. You're okay." The 2 older passengers looked at him with surprise and relief, nodding silently. From the front, Corvin rushed, not toward them, but straight to Jackson. His voice, suddenly sugary, rang out, "Sir, you all right? Need water? Need anything?" Lauren exhaled slowly, the disdain sharpening in his chest like a hidden blade. It was more than negligence, it was obsession with optics. As the plane regained a gentle glide, Lauren leaned back and turned slightly toward the men he'd helped. His voice was quiet but firm, each syllable chosen with precision. "The truth," he said, his eyes still locked on the aisle where Corvin hovered near the celebrity, "always lands before the aircraft does." The food cart slammed free. It broke loose with a metallic lurch as the plane tilted into a sudden, sharp descent, sliding with terrifying momentum down the narrow aisle, straight toward the back row. Passengers gasped. A child screamed. Lauren Voss moved. His leg shot out with clean precision, halting the cart just inches before it struck the boy seated beside him. The wheels jammed against his shin, the impact sharp but controlled. The cabin rocked again. Trays rattled. Someone shouted for help. Lauren's breath remained even. Across the aisle, Corvin Hale appeared, stumbling upright, eyes wild. He didn't check on the boy. He didn't even glance at the halted cart. "You can't interfere with equipment, sir," Corvin barked, pointing one trembling finger, his badge swinging crookedly from his neck. Lauren didn't speak at first. He turned slowly, eyes meeting the attendants, face calm despite the chaos. The boy beside him clung to the seat, whispering, "Thank you," while his father struggled to calm him. Around them, the hum of fear spread, small voices asking questions, overhead bins creaking with turbulence. Corvin crossed his arms. "Sir, I need you to stay seated." But Lauren had already reclined back, releasing the cart gently to the side, his movements deliberate. No anger, just observation. That was when his wrist buzzed. Lauren flicked the underside of the device strapped to his arm, small, matte black, unassuming. A quiet scan engaged. The badge on Corvin's chest pulsed once with a low-frequency ping. Data pulled instantly into Lauren's screen. Code authorization, reassignment protocol, unauthorized override. Lauren's jaw tightened ever so slightly. He tapped the screen again. The override command had originated from Corvin's ID, sent 2 minutes before Jackson Vale even boarded the aircraft. Not protocol, not approved, not logged in any federal seating schema he'd ever seen. It was a setup. Another sudden shift knocked a drink from a nearby tray table, the liquid splashing across Lauren's coat. He exhaled through his nose. Calm, focused, calculating. Jackson, oblivious and lounging up front, barked a complaint to no one in particular. "Can I get another soda or what? This turbulence is messing up my hair." Laughter, one of his own, not from anyone else. Lauren wiped the spill with a napkin, eyes never leaving Corvin, who had now turned to walk away. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. But another detail snapped into focus. As Corvin passed the front row, he leaned in close to another passenger and whispered something. The man turned, slightly confused. Lauren saw the smirk on Corvin's face. Then a word reached his ears through the cabin's low murmur. "Full publicity coverage, promised." Lauren leaned back into his seat. His thoughts moved with the weight of gravity. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't an accident. It was a stunt. Jackson Vale wasn't just a celebrity on a casual flight. He had been promised the seat, the attention, the platform. And Lauren, quiet, reserved, unrecognized, was the collateral, the foil, the expendable swap to sell a moment, sell an image, build a campaign. Dramatic irony circled the cabin like air pressure. The passengers didn't know the man in the back row had once advised orbital safety on sub-atmospheric emergencies. They didn't know his quiet nature masked layers of training, analysis, and compliance mastery. They didn't know that as Corvin grinned and strutted, his badge had just become evidence in a federal breach of conduct. Lauren closed his eyes for a moment. Not from weariness, but from calculation. He played back every movement, every line of dialogue, the timestamps on the override code, the timing of Jackson's arrival. Above him, the overhead bin clicked uncertainly in its latch. Another mechanical failure. Tension churned through the cabin. A man across the aisle whispered to his seatmate, "I think something's wrong with the wiring." Lauren didn't speak. He tapped 2 fingers against his wrist device again. Silent recording mode, full sweep, audio and flight parameter sync enabled. He logged everything. The turbulence, the cabin lights flickering, the crew's behavior, his calm against the storm. Another whisper behind him, this time from the older man he had shielded earlier. "I heard the attendant said the kid up front was promised something, like full coverage or whatever." Lauren nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He was starting to understand the full scope. This was not a seating mishap. It was a manipulated event, timed, tailored, and documented to uplift a brand using the optics of celebrity comfort. A headline at someone else's expense, but they had picked the wrong man. The aircraft jolted again, sending a ripple of motion through the seats. Another tray skidded. Murmurs rose, but Lauren remained immovable. Corvin passed once more, avoiding his gaze. Lauren finally spoke, voice low, steady, deliberate. "You staged this moment, but you won't control the ending." The aircraft dropped. Not gently, not gradually. It fell with the stomach-sickening jolt of a roller coaster dive, 2 full seconds of weightlessness that tore a scream from the center of the cabin. Trays crashed to the floor, drinks flew, passengers clutched at their seats or each other. Lauren Voss felt gravity vanish, then slam back like a hammer. His hands locked around the armrests of the aisle seat as he used his legs to brace the man beside him and the teenage boy in the next row. The cries around him rose to panic, but his voice cut through it, calm and anchored. "Keep your heads down. Breathe low and steady." His heart was racing, but his tone remained deliberate, practiced, each word slowing the chaos rather than feeding it. His mind moved like an internal metronome, calculating the G-force, the velocity loss, the implications of sudden vertical instability. Yet even amid this storm, one detail stung sharper than turbulence. Corvin Hale had rushed toward first class again, toward Jackson Vale, without so much as glancing behind. The dramatic irony struck hard. Lauren wasn't surprised. Not anymore. The flight crew's neglect had become a pattern. He had documented every violation, discriminatory seating changes, ignored safety protocols, faulty buckles, even Corvin's unauthorized use of a personal device for taking photos mid-flight. But now, as passengers sobbed and held on to strangers, the threat had crossed from insult to danger. Lauren's breath steadied as he retrieved his wrist device from under his sleeve, already glowing from the emergency activation it had auto-detected during the drop. The interface revealed his ongoing surveillance logs, timestamps, audio, camera feeds, biometric readings. His quiet war was already armed with evidence. Then it came, the final proof. An alert flagged Corvin's device. The feed mirrored its content for just a moment, long enough for Lauren to catch the screen before the auto-lock. A message thread, a bolded instruction from someone labeled Supervisor. Maximize celebrity interaction on flight. Prioritize optics. Build trend-ready content. Lauren's jaw tensed. They'd planned this. He hadn't been unlucky. He had been selected, deliberately removed from visibility to make room for a more marketable face. A silent, dignified black CEO replaced by an attention-grabbing young star. He was the cost of their spectacle. As if echoing that realization, a sharp bang erupted above the first-class section. The storage latch directly over Jackson's head burst open mid-flight, releasing a spill of small boxed items, toiletries, and metal case files. One struck a tray table. Passengers shouted. A young boy ducked instinctively. Jackson shrieked, "Help! Somebody! What the heck? Get it closed!" Corvin dashed forward, waving his arms but doing nothing. His eyes darted between the falling objects and the cameras he clearly feared. "It's fine," he shouted. "Just a latch issue. Stay seated." But he stayed rooted to the aisle, gesturing but not acting. Lauren rose. The plane was still trembling. The emergency lights hadn't triggered, but the tilt was enough to demand balance with every step. Passengers turned to watch as Lauren stepped toward the commotion, his movement smooth, grounded, measured. "Sir, return to your seat," Corvin barked, voice cracking now with a mixture of fear and authority. But Laren didn't stop. He reached the faulty latch, examined the mechanism, and applied precise pressure to the hinge, adjusting it with 2 fingers and a gentle upward motion. The door clicked back into place. A secondary lock sealed it. Silence followed. Lauren turned to Jackson, who sat frozen, breathing heavily. His celebrity cool drained away. Corvin approached, voice high with forced command. "You can't leave your row during turbulence. That's a violation of FAA. Safety," Lauren said without raising his voice, "isn't a privilege. It's a duty." The words landed heavy in the space between them. Passengers nearby nodded subtly. A few recorded quietly. Jackson blinked, staring at Lauren as if seeing him clearly for the first time. No sunglasses. No camera filters. No applause. Just the man he replaced, protecting him. Lauren stepped away, returning to the back row without drama. The hum of the engine returned to its normal rhythm. The plane steadied. The seat creaked as he settled into it again, breath slow and even. He looked out the window, not for the view, but for grounding. Then, softly, he said it, barely audible to anyone but himself. "Courtrooms don't forget what aircraft try to hide." The passenger collapsed without warning. His knees buckled and his body slumped into the aisle with a dull thud. Gasps rippled through the cabin, heads turning sharply as the tension snapped into something more urgent. Fear. Corvin Hale stood frozen a few rows away, mid-sentence, one hand still raised dramatically as if trying to reassert some imagined control over the cabin. His mouth hung open, but no orders came. Lauren Voss was already in motion. Without hesitation, he rose from his cramped seat in the back row, stepping swiftly into the aisle. His body moved with a practiced calm, the kind born of years navigating high-stakes environments. He knelt beside the collapsed man, mid-40s, pale, clutching his chest, and signaled 2 nearby passengers. "Elevate his legs. You, help steady his head. Keep him talking if he wakes." His voice was low but commanding, and something about the way he moved silenced the noise. The fear didn't vanish, but it shifted. It had direction now. Across the cabin, Corvin finally regained his voice. "Sir, return to your seat now. You're interfering with safety protocol." Lauren didn't even look up. "The only interference here is negligence." Gasps from surrounding passengers whispered like wind through the trees. Someone hit the call button. Another passenger, older, gray at the temples, spoke for the first time. "He's helping. Why aren't you?" Corvin flinched at that. His face tightened, his jaw twitching, but he offered no reply. Instead, he turned and stormed toward the front of the aircraft, muttering something under his breath. Lauren's mind was already elsewhere. His fingers checked the man's pulse, then lightly tapped his cheek. The passenger groaned and blinked. Good. Still conscious. He issued quick instructions for water and kept the man calm while ensuring he wasn't worsening. Behind him, the murmur of the passenger frustration began to swell into something more vocal. Whispers of, "This is ridiculous," "He's the only one doing anything," and "What's wrong with the crew?" grew louder by the second. Lauren finally stood. His posture was tall, composed, unshaken. That's when he heard it, static followed by muffled shouting. He turned his head just slightly toward the intercom system at the front of the plane. The door to the cockpit wasn't fully closed, and through it came the unmistakable sound of an argument. "I told you, the metrics spike with celebrity activity," a voice snapped. It was the captain, Merrick Dalen. Lauren's jaw clenched. So it was true. The pieces were falling into place. Jackson Vale wasn't just a lucky passenger. This was a planned media stunt, and he had been collateral damage. He returned to his seat slowly, his steps precise. As he sat, he caught the eyes of several passengers who nodded at him with something that looked like gratitude. Then soft footsteps approached. Hesitant. Familiar. It was Jackson. He looked different now. Paler. Smaller somehow. He paused beside Lauren's seat, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know they pushed you for me." Lauren turned his head. No anger showed in his face, only a firm, exhausted clarity. Knowing comes with responsibility. Jackson stood still for a second longer, then backed away, the shame plain in his posture. From the front of the aircraft, Corvin's voice rose again. He was trying to control the narrative, shouting over the intercom about passenger compliance and standard turbulence procedures. But it was falling flat. Everyone had seen who acted when it counted and who didn't. The mood in the plane turned, like a tide shifting mid-flight. More passengers began speaking up. One man near the emergency row muttered, "He doesn't know protocol from posturing." Another held up his phone, still recording. A teenager whispered to her father, "Why are they still pretending?" Corvin's face appeared again briefly down the aisle, and for the first time he looked unsure. Panicked even. The illusion of control was gone, and he knew it. Lauren sat silently through it all, his mind racing through the timelines, each event, each error, each violated policy. He replayed Corvin's actions, the captain's voice, the collapsed passenger, the unscheduled turbulence delays. It all aligned with one ugly truth. This flight was never about safety. It was about image, and he had been sacrificed for a headline. But now the headline was changing. As the aircraft pitched slightly again, the seatbelt signs dinged to life, and the pilot's voice crackled overhead. "Due to optimized schedule coordination, we'll remain airborne for another 8 minutes." Lauren stiffened. Optimized schedule coordination. That was a violation. In the event of a medical incident, even minor, protocol demanded prompt descent or at least immediate coordination with ground response. The pilot's language wasn't accidental. It was code. They were still prioritizing optics over safety. From the corner of his eye, Lauren saw Corvin return to the front, whispering something to Jackson. The younger man shook his head sharply, stepping away, face pale. Even he had finally drawn the line. The tension inside the aircraft pressed down like cabin pressure. Every breath felt tighter, every second more exposed. Lauren exhaled slowly, keeping his posture upright, hands folded calmly on his lap. He knew what was coming, and he was ready for it. His voice, low and even, barely above the hum of the engines, drifted to the passenger beside him. Truth flies faster than fame. The smell hit like a jolt, acrid, unmistakable, threading through the cabin from the midsection ceiling vents just as the aircraft began its final descent. Passengers tensed. A few cried out. Heads turned upward, eyes searching the narrow overhead seams for confirmation of what their noses already knew. Something was wrong. Lauren Voss didn't move at first. He closed his eyes for half a second, mentally sorting through every known emergency ventilation failure scenario. The odor wasn't smoke. It was insulation, specifically thermal foam overheating under pressure. Manageable, but only if airflow was reduced before it ignited. Around him, panic flared like dry tinder. He rose from his seat slowly, purposefully, as passengers to his left crouched low and those on his right whispered urgent prayers. One man clutched his son's jacket. Another fumbled with the oxygen mask controls, which had not yet deployed. Lauren's voice cut through the confusion, measured, steady, low enough to calm but firm enough to command. "Stay low. Cover your mouths. This is not combustion yet." Further up the aisle, Corvin Hale bolted forward, shouting vague instructions without pausing to assess anything. His voice cracked with forced authority. "Everyone remain seated. This is just a routine vent issue," he yelled, waving his hands. But his face betrayed him. Pale, sweating, unsure. Not routine, not remotely controlled. Lauren moved to the aisle and gently placed a hand on the shoulder of a trembling teenager. "Breathe slow. Head between your knees. Trust your lungs more than your fear." Jackson Vale, slouched uncomfortably in the first-class seat that had once been Lauren's, craned his neck over the seat divider. His expression had changed. No longer arrogant, no longer amused. Shame clung to him now, heavy and silent. He said nothing. Then it happened. A sharp ding rang out, followed by the flicker of every cabin screen, and on each one a message appeared, large, bold, clearly sent in error. "We can't divert now. Media team is ready." Gasps erupted. The screens froze, the message locked in like a damning confession. Phones came out in a flurry. Dozens of passengers lifted cameras, capturing the proof. Corvin, halfway through another hollow reassurance, stared in horror. His device trembled in his hand as he scrambled to override the display. Too late. "You knew this aircraft wasn't cleared, didn't you?" Lauren muttered, locking eyes with Corvin. Corvin flinched. He turned as if seeking a way out of the aisle, but there was none. The tide had turned. Passengers no longer looked to him. Their eyes followed Lauren. The plane shook again. A low dip, sharper than it should have been, made the floor tremble beneath their feet. Lauren shifted his stance to stay upright, using his experience with gravitational shifts from orbital field tests. He turned toward the rear and spoke again, this time with more volume. "Everyone in rows 18 through 27, brace positions. Hold tight to the seats in front of you, eyes forward. Don't look up." There was no panic in his voice, just conviction. A young man near the lavatory raised his hand instinctively. "Is it going to crash?" "No," Lauren said with certainty. "But it's going to land hard. Prepare for that. That's how we protect each other now." He gestured for two passengers to help an elderly man lean forward in his seat. Another man, gripping the handle of a cane, nodded at Lauren in silent gratitude. Unity formed quickly when fear was met with leadership. Corvin lunged toward Lauren, trying to pull back control. "You can't just order passengers around." But before his hand reached Lauren, three men stepped in. One wore a mechanic's jumpsuit. Another, a teacher with a faculty ID still clipped to his collar. The third was silent, built like a linebacker. "Back off," one of them growled. Corvin stumbled backward, bumping into a drink cart, flustered and wide-eyed. He looked around for support, but even the junior attendant had vanished down the galley, hiding. From the intercom, the captain's voice came on, unconvincing and brittle. "We are beginning final descent. Please stay calm and follow crew instructions." But no one moved. They were already following Lauren. In the rear, a passenger shouted, "Do what the man in the aisle says," and the cabin echoed with agreement. Lauren glanced once more toward Corvin, then at Jackson, who was now gripping his seatbelt with white knuckles. The celebrity caught his eye and offered a shaky nod, a silent apology buried behind frightened eyes. The engines pitched lower. Flaps adjusted with a thud. Altitude ticked down on the rear display, fast. Lauren tightened his jaw, bracing himself between two seats, one hand gripping a metal bar near the seat-back pocket. He exhaled slowly and whispered words meant only for himself, but the closest passengers heard them. Landing won't end this. It will expose it. He was shuffled aside, smiling at the spectacle, unaware that every witness, every camera, and every legal avenue was silently lining up against the arrogance. If you believe entitlement always folds when confronted by truth, hit subscribe now, because justice remembers. The moment the wheels struck the runway, the aircraft bounced hard, so violently that a chorus of gasps and screams exploded through the cabin like a ruptured pipe of panic. The metal frame groaned under the stress as overhead bins rattled and oxygen masks dropped from above, not from need, but due to a system malfunction. Dr. Laren Voss tightened his grip around the armrest with one hand while steadying a young boy beside him with the other, keeping the child from being thrown forward into the tray table. The boy's father, a tired-looking man with a passenger badge still clipped to his collar, looked at Lauren with a dazed expression, mouthing, "Thank you," through the chaos. Lauren's jaw was clenched, but his eyes remained sharp and calm, scanning the cabin. He took in everything at once, the flashing exit signs, the uneven cabin pressure, the stunned silence beginning to replace the screams, and then the sudden eruption of shouting from the front. Jackson Vale, the young celebrity who hours ago had claimed Lauren's rightful seat with the help of a sycophantic crew, was now wide-eyed and desperate, shouting, "Dr. Voss, what do we do? Tell me what to do." The irony rippled through the air like electricity. Passengers had once ignored Lauren, some even smirking when he was escorted to the back like luggage. Now they turned toward him, instinctively recognizing the only person on board who hadn't crumbled. Lauren's thoughts narrowed into clarity. His objective was no longer quiet dignity. It was survival and preservation of truth. Without missing a beat, he reached for his wrist device and pressed 3 hidden nodes along the outer edge. A soft pulse vibrated beneath his skin as the encrypted emergency log activated, uploading every second of audio, video, seating logs, and crew behavior to a secure government server. The hidden uplink, known only to consultants of the Orbital Ethics Division, lit green within his peripheral display. Failsafe triggered. Mid-cabin, Corvin Hale, now visibly sweating through his uniform, stepped into the aisle with arms outstretched, blocking the path forward. "Please remain calm. VIP passenger is disembarking first for safety protocol." Several male passengers snapped. "He's not a first responder," one shouted. Another added, "Get out of the way." The tension burst as 3 men pushed past Corvin, sending him stumbling back into a seat. No one cared about his flimsy justification anymore. The curtain of celebrity protection had been ripped in half. At the front, Jackson was being pulled aside by Corvin, who hissed frantically in his ear, "There will be statements to control the story. We have media protocols for this." Jackson pulled back, breathless. "I'm not lying for you," he muttered, his face pale as the truth continued to corner him. Over the intercom, the captain's voice cracked in. We apologize for the landing. Please remain seated. Everything is under control." But the words were weak, hollow, and immediately met with a wave of jeers and boos. The illusion of control had died the moment real leadership emerged from seat 37D. Laren stood. The sudden movement turned heads. He stepped into the aisle with the kind of silent authority that didn't need volume. Corvin noticed and lunged forward, grabbing Lauren's arm roughly. "You're to stay seated for questioning." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Lauren didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, eyes locked onto Corvin with the cool intensity of someone who knew the law better than the man pretending to wield it. "Interference with a federal consultant is a criminal act," he said, voice smooth as glass and twice as cutting. The silence shattered into gasps. A passenger dropped his phone from shock. Corvin's face drained of color. His hand slipped away as if burned. Behind him, Jackson looked on in stunned realization, mouth open, shoulders heavy with shame. Several phones were now trained on Lauren. not out of spectacle, but reverence. Lauren exhaled slowly and stepped forward. Every movement was deliberate, composed, undeniable. His posture straightened with unshakable control, and as the aircraft finally rolled to a stop, he looked across the stunned cabin. The weight of injustice, chaos, and performative power had all collapsed under something they didn't expect: integrity. He raised his chin slightly and delivered a sentence that split the moment in two: before and after. This landing marks the beginning, not the end. The cabin door swung open with a sharp hiss, and a rush of cold air blasted into the stale, tension-heavy aircraft. The sudden change in temperature cut through the layered discomfort like a knife, waking passengers from their daze of fear and disbelief. But instead of the expected ground crew or paramedics, a group of sharply dressed men in black windbreakers bearing the seal of the Aerial Conduct Authority marched down the aisle with swift precision. They didn't smile. They didn't pause. They knew exactly where they were going. Corvin Hale, still clutching the edge of a storage cabinet for balance, stiffened. His eyes darted toward the cockpit where Captain Merrick Dalen remained half-shadowed behind the reinforced door. Corvin leaned in close to whisper, his voice tight and almost trembling. He wasn't supposed to be anyone important. But Lauren Voss heard it, every word, and he didn't move. Instead, he stepped back from the aisle, letting the investigators pass, his gaze calm but unreadable. His objective had changed again, and now it was singular and sharp. Ensure that the truth, every painful inch of it, made it into the record without manipulation, distraction, or delay. One of the investigators, a tall man named Halrin Moore, glanced briefly at Lauren and nodded in silent recognition. The nod was not of greeting, but of acknowledgement. The emergency transmission had been received. The data had been logged. The authority was here because someone on board had the credibility, clarity, and calm to report what the crew had tried to bury. Before the investigators could even finish unzipping their equipment cases, several passengers stood up, raising their hands like schoolchildren desperate to be heard. One older man, still gripping the wrist of his teenage grandson, called out, "That man saved us. Not the crew, him." He pointed toward Lauren. Others joined in, each testimony weaving a tapestry of what had really unfolded. The dismissals, the dangerous turbulence, the lack of crew response, the celebrity obsession, and above all, the presence of one man who had acted like a captain when the real one had vanished behind whispers and screens. Through it all, Lauren remained quiet, his expression a steady line of focused resolve. He hadn't come for attention, and he didn't bask in it now. From several rows forward, Jackson Vale emerged, his usual swagger gone. His hoodie was soaked with sweat, and his eyes carried the burden of realization. He walked up to Lauren slowly, guilt pressing into every step like ankle weights. "I didn't know," he said, barely above a whisper. "I thought I was just doing what they asked. They said it'd be harmless. A seat." He shook his head, his voice fraying. "I didn't know they were pushing you for me." Lauren didn't reply immediately. He looked at Jackson, not with resentment, but with the heavy clarity of someone who had seen systems like this for years and recognized the players, willing or not. "I believe you," Lauren finally said, his voice measured. "But what you didn't know almost cost lives, and what they knew is what matters now." Further up the aisle, Investigator Moore motioned toward Corvin, whose body was now rigid with panic. Another agent took position near the captain's door. The aircraft had become a floating tribunal. "Separate the crew," Moore ordered. "We begin here, now." Corvin moved suddenly, fumbling with his tablet device, fingers shaking as he tapped through menus, swiping frantically. His face paled as the screen froze. Then a message appeared. Access denied. Data mirrored. He turned, locking eyes with Lauren, who simply lifted his wrist slightly, just enough to remind Corvin of the recording device embedded in the strap. Everything had been uploaded to the Aerial Conduct Authority's servers the moment the plane touched ground. Messages, footage, timestamps, audio logs. The truth had left the aircraft before Corvin had even tried to erase it. The captain attempted a last-second tactic, stepping into the aisle and raising his voice. "Let's be clear. This was all handled by my attendant. Mr. Hale acted alone and without my knowledge. I'll cooperate fully with the—" "No," someone snapped from the passenger rows. "You knew. You said his name before we even took off." Another voice joined in. "You sent him the message about the publicity team. We saw it." The cabin, which once echoed with fear, now filled with resolve. The passengers had seen through the facade. Lauren didn't need to say a word. They were speaking for him now. Jackson suddenly stepped forward again, more forcefully this time. "I want to give a statement," he said to Investigator Moore. "I was told to board early. Pick any seat, even if it was taken. I thought it was weird, but they made it sound like it'd help the airline's image. I didn't think. I let them use me." Moore raised an eyebrow but motioned for another officer to begin documenting. Corvin's eyes darted from face to face, now fully aware that the mask had dropped. There was no controlling the narrative anymore, not with 20 passenger testimonies, not with mirrored logs, not with a federal consultant standing quietly at the back, watching the collapse of the charade. Lauren looked around at the near-empty cabin, crew being led away, passengers with phones still rolling, a celebrity now echoing regret, and his own calm intact, never once raised his voice, never once lost control. He exhaled slowly and whispered the final line of this chapter, letting it hang in the charged silence. "You can't market your way out of the truth." The heavy glass doors of the secured terminal lounge slammed shut behind the last group of passengers. A sterile quiet fell over the room, broken only by the low hum of overhead lights and the rustle of coats being removed. Security officers stood like statues near every exit. No one was permitted to leave without giving a formal statement. Lauren Voss sat at the center of the room, not by design, but by gravity. The space around him naturally cleared, as if passengers subconsciously gave way to the man who had steadied the chaos mid-air. He rested with his hands folded calmly, his wrist device gently pulsing with a soft blue light, silently uploading everything: footage, sound, timestamps, to a government cloud server already waiting for his signal. On the surface, he looked composed, but inside, his mind moved with precision, reviewing, connecting, storing. One of the investigators, a tall, balding man with sharp eyes, approached slowly. "Dr. Voss?" he asked, voice low but respectful. Lauren nodded without looking up. "You've received the first transmission?" "Crystal clear," the man confirmed, lifting a tablet. "Some of the most structured evidence we've ever seen from an in-flight witness. Or consultant." Lauren didn't smile. "I wasn't acting as a consultant. I was acting as a passenger." The investigator hesitated, then moved on. Around the lounge, clusters of passengers were giving statements to clipboard-holding agents in navy blazers. The air smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel. Several people kept glancing toward Lauren, not with curiosity anymore, but with quiet gratitude. A few even whispered to each other, pointing out how calm he'd been when the crew had lost control. Across the room, Jackson Vale paced near the vending machines, pale and wringing his hands. Gone was the cocky swagger from earlier, replaced now by the twitchy unease of a man who had realized the spotlight could burn. He moved with hesitation, pausing before he finally walked toward Lauren. No cameras, no handlers, no entourage. Just guilt. "Can I?" Jackson asked, barely above a whisper. Lauren didn't move. "You already are." Jackson sat down beside him, keeping his posture low, like a student in trouble. "They told me. The airline told me it would help, that it would be harmless. Just promotional footage. They said I could pick any seat. They said replacing—" he swallowed hard. "Replacing someone who wouldn't be noticed would make it smoother." Lauren's eyes remained fixed on the far wall, watching his own footage mirrored live on an investigator's screen. "You thought you were helping them, but they used you." "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," Jackson blurted, rubbing his temple. "I never meant to." Lauren finally turned his head. His voice was low, direct. "Intent matters, but impact defines the truth." The courtroom lights were cold and clinical, their glow casting long shadows across the packed benches of Velmore City Court. The bailiff had just called for order, and murmurs faded into a tense silence. At the witness stand stood Jackson Vale. No sunglasses, no stylist, no carefully rehearsed statement. Just a young man in a charcoal suit with trembling fingers and a storm behind his eyes. "I'd like to begin by saying I wasn't told to be here," he said, voice cracking slightly. "No one coached this. I asked to testify." The judge, a stern older man with a slate-gray beard and eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense, nodded for him to continue. Reporters leaned forward. Several passengers from Flight 742 were seated just behind the prosecution bench, their presence a silent testament to the reality of what had unfolded. And seated in the second row, calm and still as ever, was Dr. Laren Voss. Jackson hesitated only a breath before turning his eyes to him. "I didn't know who you were. That seat, it was offered. No one told me what they were doing to give it to me. They just said it was arranged. They said—" He exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. "They said you'd be fine, that you were low visibility." Gasps rippled through the room. Lauren did not flinch. His fingers rested atop a simple folder, though everything of value had already been uploaded through secure channels. The courtroom didn't need paper. It needed truth. Skylux's lead attorney, Weston Corliff, rose from his seat, his tie twitching from the sudden movement. "Objection. Speculation regarding internal terms." "Overruled," the judge said before Corliff could finish. "The witness is stating what he was told directly. Continue, Mr. Vale." Jackson's eyes dropped, shame rising like a wave. "They told me to film as much as possible, show how real the flight was. They said the footage would help the airline, that I'd get unlimited upgrades, and that I could, exact words, pick any seat I wanted. I didn't ask how. I didn't care who lost their seat. I just wanted the perks." The silence that followed felt heavier than any turbulence. Corliff shuffled through papers, clearly rattled. "Your Honor, there is no record of such a contractual arrangement." At the prosecution table, lead investigator Darnell Riven tapped a key on his laptop. The court monitor behind the judge lit up, displaying a mirrored data log pulled from Corvin Hale's device, one of the dozens Lauren had captured through his wrist system. "Message dated 2 hours before takeoff," Riven said aloud. "Ensure Vale is seated in 1A. Replace economy tier ticket if necessary. Per promotional strategy, tier C." A collective murmur pulsed through the courtroom. Corliff slammed his folder closed in frustration. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Would the defense care to revise its previous statement?" Corliff stood silent. Dramatic irony saturated the air. The same attorneys who had moments ago tried to depict Lauren as overreactive were now cornered by the data he had calmly submitted weeks earlier, data they assumed would never surface. Lauren remained unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't sneer. He simply watched, absorbing every word, knowing this moment wasn't about vengeance. It was about systems, and what happens when they prioritize optics over people. "Mr. Vale," the judge said, voice gentler now, "were you ever informed that a paying passenger was removed to accommodate you?" "No, sir," Jackson answered. "Not directly, but I didn't ask either. I just assumed someone made it happen." He turned back to Lauren, his voice breaking. "I let them use me. I thought I was helping a company, but I didn't think about what I was doing to you, or to everyone else. I'm sorry." A few passengers behind Lauren nodded subtly, acknowledging the admission, but Lauren didn't move. "Do you have anything to say, Dr. Voss?" the judge finally asked. Lauren rose slowly, his presence drawing the full attention of the chamber. When he spoke, it was with the same composure that had carried him through the storm at 30,000 feet. Respect is never optional. The following internal exhibits will be presented under seal for judicial review, the investigator announced, placing a thick folder of red-stamped documents onto the judge's bench. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. The buzz began the moment the lead investigator uttered the phrase, "Targeted passenger reassignments." The words echoed through the chambers like a fire alarm, sharp, unexpected, undeniable. Within moments, the courtroom's earlier murmur of procedural rhythm collapsed into open outrage. Lauren Voss sat unmoving at the front of the gallery, his fingers gently interlaced, expression unreadable. But inside, he felt it. The shift. This wasn't just about his stolen seat anymore. It was a systematic strategy exposed, a machinery that had functioned silently until Flight 742 cracked it wide open. The document outlines a deliberate policy, the investigator continued, holding up a sheet with bold subheadings, in which passengers categorized as low publicity value were deprioritized in the event of unscheduled celebrity boarding. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Define low publicity value, please." The investigator adjusted his glasses. Passengers with low social media presence, minimal professional visibility, or, explicitly noted in some annotations, those least likely to cause public disruption if displaced. A cold silence settled over the room. From the defense table, Corvin Hale's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection. This is speculation." "No, it isn't," interrupted another voice. All heads turned. It was Taryn Halden, a former Skylux crew member, freshly subpoenaed. Nervous but determined, he took the stand with a straight back and clenched jaw. "It's real. We were briefed to accommodate influencers or high-visibility figures. The Tier C protocol was enforced by mid-level execs. Corvin, he didn't resist it. He thrived on it." Corvin's face went pale. Sweat dotted his temple. "He used to brag," Taryn added, voice trembling now. "Said it made him feel closer to the top. Once joked that swapping out quiet passengers made the plane look like a floating red carpet. He enjoyed it." Lauren remained still, but his jaw tightened. His objective, once rooted in personal dignity, now burned with higher purpose, systemic correction. He glanced toward the jury. Their eyes were wide. They understood. From the witness bench, the captain shifted uncomfortably. When called to the stand next, he tried redirecting the blame. "We were told by promotions that delays could cost millions in exposure." "And skipped maintenance," the prosecutor snapped. "Was that a directive too?" The courtroom tensed. The captain hesitated, then dropped his gaze. We were told to prioritize visuals, not back-end integrity." Lauren closed his eyes briefly. That explained the faulty latch, the overheated vents. The turbulence warnings brushed aside. Dramatic irony filled the room. Those who marketed safety had quietly endangered everyone. "Your Honor," the lead investigator said, holding up a charred maintenance report, "we've linked the overheating mid-flight directly to deferred panel inspections. The aircraft wasn't cleared for its route, but they pushed it forward to preserve the celebrity coverage window." The judge slammed the gavel once. "That confirms deliberate negligence." From the bench beside him, Jackson Vale, once radiant with confidence, now hollow-eyed, rose to his feet unprompted. "I need to speak," he said, voice shaking. His attorney tried to stop him, but Jackson pushed forward. The courtroom let him. "I was told I'd be featured as the face of Skylux. They said someone else would be moved quietly and that it wasn't personal. I didn't question it. I didn't ask who." He turned to face Lauren. "But when that plane began shaking, when no one listened, everyone turned to him. Not me, not Corvin, him. That's when I realized fame doesn't know how to lead. Character does." Tears gathered in his eyes. "I didn't just take a seat. I helped bury the truth. I'm sorry." The room sat stunned. Even the judge leaned back slowly, processing the gravity of the moment. Lauren finally stood, approached the front with quiet, composed steps, and offered his final testimony for the day. He laid out each violation, the override codes, the misused protocols, the ignored alerts. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply presented the facts, trusting truth to do what rage never could. The judge nodded slowly, writing notes with deliberate gravity. "Without this man's recordings and restraint," he said aloud, "none of this may have surfaced." Media cameras outside the chamber captured the weight of that moment, the calm strength of a man who refused to let humiliation define him. Reporters leaned forward as the judge announced an unexpected development. "In light of these revelations, we are opening a federal inquiry into the airline's marketing and safety procedures. This court will not permit image to overrule truth." As the crowd rose, Lauren remained seated, absorbing the full breadth of what had just unfolded. And just before leaving the courtroom, he whispered one sentence, not to anyone in particular, but to the very system that tried to erase him. "A system built on image cannot withstand the weight of truth." The courtroom was silent when the judge's gavel struck the bench for the final time. The sentence hit harder than expected, not because it was loud, but because of what followed. Skylux Aviation will be fined $118 million for federal safety breaches, protocol falsification, and discriminatory seat reassignment practices, the judge declared. His voice was steady, but the tremor in the audience made the walls feel tighter. Effective immediately, the executive team listed in Exhibit C is relieved of operational control. Crew members directly involved, including Mr. Corvin Hale, are permanently barred from all commercial aviation activities within U.S. airspace. For a moment, no one moved. Lauren Voss, seated in the gallery near the center aisle, didn't blink. He hadn't come for applause. He had come for truth, the kind that ripples long after the cameras stop rolling. He sat still, dressed in a quiet charcoal suit that didn't ask for attention but demanded presence. Around him were journalists scribbling notes, former Flight 742 passengers whispering, and representatives from the Aerial Conduct Authority nodding at the ruling. Even Jackson Vale, once draped in arrogance, sat hunched forward, his eyes fixed on the courtroom floor. But the twist hadn't come yet. As part of this court's ruling, the judge continued, adjusting his glasses, a new regulatory framework will be drafted based on the evidence and structural recommendations submitted by Dr. Lauren Voss. This system, henceforth titled the Voss Integrity Standard, shall include the enforcement of transparent seating protocols, verifiable emergency prioritization processes, and mandatory bias prevention training for all commercial flight staff. Gasps punctured the stillness. Lauren finally looked up, not in pride, but in quiet vindication. His mind drifted to the moment he had been shoved to the back row of that flight, near the lavatory, as a celebrity basked in stolen privilege. Now, that same injustice had rewritten aviation law. The judge's words echoed. "Dr. Voss, this courtroom commends your restraint and resolve. It is often the calmest voice that carries the farthest." The cameras outside clicked and flashed as Lauren exited the building, but he barely noticed. Jackson followed him down the courthouse steps, reporters parting like a tide. He caught up, not running, just walking with more sincerity than he'd shown in months. "I wanted to thank you," Jackson said, his voice catching in the throat, "for what you did. Not just for staying calm, but for showing me what real responsibility looks like." Lauren didn't answer right away. He stared out at the street, watching traffic pass, ordinary life moving forward as if an industry hadn't just shifted. Then he turned, not with anger, not even with sadness, just clarity. "Dignity teaches better than blame," he replied quietly. Jackson nodded, biting his lip. He didn't offer to shake hands. Some distances are meant to be respected. Over the next few weeks, the impact of the verdict would explode through the media: boardroom shuffles, federal audits, training center reforms. Skylux became the cautionary tale, and the Voss Integrity Standard became the new safety scripture. In one broadcast, Jackson appeared in a live interview, seated upright without makeup or flashy lighting. "I spent months thinking I was the victim of a PR disaster," he told the anchor. "But the truth is, I helped cause it, and I'm thankful someone like Dr. Voss was there to stop it from becoming a tragedy." His words rippled through social platforms, and gradually the story shifted from spectacle to systemic reform. One early morning, months later, Lauren walked through Marston International Airport with a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. No fanfare, no cameras. He passed security like anyone else, though a few agents nodded discreetly. At Gate 31A, he paused to check a digital display. Behind him, a young man in a gray coat hesitated before speaking. "Sir, you're Dr. Voss, right?" Lauren turned slightly. The man's voice was low but earnest. "My uncle was on your flight. He told us everything. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up." Lauren offered a small smile. Not performative, just real. He nodded once, and then, in the calmest tone, with the airport humming softly around him, he answered with the words that had come to define not just the verdict, not just the reform, but the legacy of everything that followed. Justice begins where silence ends. He lost the seat and watched as the celebrity was still apologizing in court months later, every word a reminder of who really commands respect. If you believe dignity commands accountability, subscribe now, because justice never misses a seat. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores racism, entitlement, and the consequences of arrogance when justice is served. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every individual, regardless of status or fame.